I understand you want an 11,000-word story. That's a substantial length that will require careful pacing and development. Let me create this complete romantic fantasy for you, ensuring every element from the title plays out meaningfully on the page. Zarah Jamison was 3 weeks behind on rent when the email arrived offering her $2,000 to teach someone how to use the word yeet correctly. She read it twice, sitting cross-legged on her futon in the cramped studio apartment that smelled perpetually of the Thai restaurant downstairs, her laptop balanced on a stack of linguistic journals she couldn't afford to keep subscribing to. The message was formal to the point of archaism, stipulating that a client required comprehensive instruction in contemporary vernacular, digital communication customs, and modern colloquial expression for an unnamed gentleman who needed to navigate 21st century social interaction with authenticity. 20 sessions, $2,000 per session, cash on completion of each lesson. Non-disclosure agreement attached. Zarah had spent 6 years getting a master's degree in sociolinguistics, had written her thesis on semantic shift in internet slang, and was currently working 3 tutoring gigs that paid barely enough to cover groceries. The skeptical part of her brain that had been honed by years of academic rigor screamed that this was obviously a scam, possibly dangerous, definitely too good to be true. She signed the NDA and replied yes within 4 minutes. The instructions that followed were as peculiar as everything else. She was to meet her student at an address in the Old District, the part of the city where cobblestones still lined certain streets and buildings remembered when gaslights had been an innovation. She was to come alone, arrive precisely at sunset, and bring whatever materials she deemed necessary. A car would collect her if she preferred not to walk in that neighborhood after dark. Zarah declined the car, partly from stubbornness, and partly because she'd grown up in a city and refused to be intimidated by shadows. She showed up 7 minutes early with her messenger bag full of notebooks, her phone loaded with meme compilations, and a canister of pepper spray tucked in her jacket pocket that she'd bought on the way over. The building was a narrow townhouse, wedged between 2 modern apartments, somehow overlooked by the renovation boom that had gentrified the surrounding blocks. The door was dark wood, reinforced with iron, the knocker shaped like a coiled serpent. Zarah raised her hand to knock and the door swung inward before her knuckles made contact. The man standing in the entrance was not what she'd expected, though she couldn't have articulated what she'd been expecting. He was tall, several inches over 6 feet, and carried himself with a particular kind of stillness that made her think of paintings in museums, of portraits where the subject's eyes followed you across the room. His hair was so pale it seemed almost white in the dim interior light, falling to his shoulders in a way that should have looked affected but somehow didn't. His skin had that same colorless quality, like porcelain or marble, and when he looked at her his eyes were a gray so light they were nearly silver. He was beautiful in a way that made her breath catch, but beautiful in the way that winter was beautiful, distant and perfect and cold. Then he smiled, and the impression shifted entirely. "Miss Jamison," he said, and his voice was smoke and velvet, accented in a way she couldn't place, British but not quite, European but from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm most pleased to make your acquaintance. Please do enter. I'm Draeven Konstantin, and I am, as you might say, in dire need of your expertise." The way he said dire need made it sound like he was confessing to a fatal illness. Zarah stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a soft, final click. The interior of the townhouse was a study in contradictions. The architecture was clearly old, all dark wood paneling and high ceilings with plasterwork that belonged in a different century, but the furnishings were immaculate and carefully maintained. A fire burned in the fireplace even though it was barely autumn. The lighting was low, candles and carefully placed lamps that created pools of gold in the surrounding dimness. Draven gestured her toward a sitting room where 2 chairs faced each other across a small table. Everything about his movements was precise, controlled, like he'd choreographed them centuries ago and still performed them perfectly. "May I offer you refreshment?" he asked. "I have tea, coffee, wine. I'm afraid I'm not certain what is customary for this sort of engagement." "Water's fine," Zarah said, shrugging off her jacket and trying to project more confidence than she felt. The house was warm, but she'd felt a chill when she walked in that had nothing to do with temperature. "So, Mr. Konstantin, the email wasn't super clear on what exactly you're hoping to learn. You want to understand modern slang, internet culture, that kind of thing?" He returned with a glass of water and crystal that probably cost more than her laptop, setting it before her with careful ceremony before settling into the chair opposite. His posture was absolutely perfect, spine straight, hands folded in his lap. He looked like he was sitting for a portrait. "Indeed," he said, "I find myself in a position where I must interact with contemporary society, and I am given to understand that my manner of speaking is considered, unusual, outdated. I'm told I sound as though I've stepped from the pages of a Victorian novel." Zarah took a sip of water to hide the smile. He absolutely did. Every word was enunciated with precision, his grammar flawless to the point of being archaic. "Okay, yeah, I can hear that. So you want to sound more natural, more like a regular person?" "Precisely. I need to be able to navigate social situations, comprehend modern references, and communicate in a way that does not immediately mark me as, shall we say, out of touch." "Can I ask why?" "I mean, there are plenty of people who talk formally. It's not that weird." Something flickered across his face, amusement or calculation or something else. "Let us say that I have important engagements on the horizon where blending in would be advantageous. I would prefer not to draw undue attention." It was clearly all he was going to offer, and Zarah decided she didn't care. For $2,000 a session, he could be as mysterious as he wanted. "All right," she said, pulling out her notebook. "Let's start with the basics. What's your current understanding of contemporary slang? Do you use any informal language at all?" Draeven considered this with the gravity of someone pondering a philosophical treatise. "I have made some study of it," he said carefully. "For instance, I comprehend that cool indicates approval, and that sick may also indicate approval, which I confess I find linguistically perverse. I understand that literally is now used to mean figuratively, which pains me more than I can adequately express." Zarah laughed before she could stop herself. His mouth quirked, pleased. "I have also been informed," he continued, "that there is a term, yeet, which I am told is essential to modern discourse. I have not yet successfully determined what it means or in what context one deploys it." "Oh man," Zarah said, grinning now. "Okay, yeah, we've got work to do. Yeet is like it's a versatile term, right? It generally implies throwing something with force and abandon. Like, if I threw this pen across the room, I might yell yeet while doing it. It's about the energy, the recklessness of the action." Draeven absorbed this with intense focus. "So it is a verb. To yeet. I yeeted. I have yeeted? I mean, technically, but it's more about the vibe than the grammar. You don't really conjugate it carefully. It's spontaneous." "The vibe," he repeated as though memorizing a spell. "Spontaneous, I see. And if one were to, for example, yeet a," he glanced around, "a book, this would be appropriate usage? If you were throwing it with enough chaotic energy, sure." He looked at the book on the side table, a leather-bound tome that probably predated her great-grandparents, and for a moment she thought he might actually test the theory. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Fascinating. Language has certainly evolved in interesting directions." They worked for 2 hours, Zarah walking him through the basics of internet culture, the difference between a meme and a viral video, why people said "I'm dead" when they found something funny, how emoji could completely change the tone of a text message. Draeven listened with absolute attention, asked insightful questions, and occasionally said things that made her laugh so hard she had to stop talking. He wanted to know if Netflix and chill truly meant watching Netflix, or if it was euphemistic. And when she explained it was definitely euphemistic, he nodded gravely and said, "So it is akin to inviting someone to see one's etchings. The more things change, the more they remain the same." He practiced using LOL in a sentence and delivered it with such straight-faced formality that it sounded like he was announcing someone's title at a ball. He asked whether sliding into DMs was a dance move. By the time Zarah glanced at her phone and realized it was past 9, she'd almost forgotten how strange the whole situation was. Draeven was odd, certainly, formal and old-fashioned, and clearly from money if this house and his clothes were any indication. But he was also funny in a dry, understated way, smart, attentive, and genuinely interested in what she was teaching. When he smiled at one of her explanations, his whole face transformed, becoming warmer, more human. I believe that's probably enough for today, she said, packing up her materials. You're actually picking this up faster than I expected. A lot of people struggle with the context-dependent stuff. I have some experience with codes and hidden languages, Draven said, rising as she did. His manners were impeccable, automatically adjusting to her movements. Though I confess the logic of modern slang is more chaotic than what I'm accustomed to. Thank you, Miss Jamison. This has been enlightening. He handed her an envelope, thick with cash. Zarah tried not to look too eager as she slipped it into her bag. Same time next week? She asked. I look forward to it. He walked her to the door, and when she stepped out into the street, the night had fully settled. The neighborhood was quiet, pools of streetlight making islands in the darkness. Zarah glanced back once and saw Draven still standing in the doorway, a pale figure framed in warm light, watching her leave with an expression she couldn't read. She walked home quickly, her bag heavy with cash, her mind already running through lesson plans for their next session. She was 3 blocks away when she realized she hadn't heard him breathe once during the entire 2 hours. The thought lodged in her mind like a splinter, small and sharp. She pushed it away and kept walking. The sessions became a rhythm. Every week Zarah arrived at sunset, and every week Draven opened the door before she could knock. They sat in the warm sitting room with the fire always burning, and she taught him the secret language of the 21st century. She showed him TikTok trends and explained why certain sounds went viral. She walked him through Twitter culture, the difference between a ratio and a dunk, why people said no thoughts head empty, and what main character energy meant. She made him practice texting with proper millennial cadence, taught him that ending a sentence with a period could seem aggressive, that K was very different from OK, which was different from OK. Draven was an exceptional student. He absorbed everything with that intense focus, asked questions that showed he was thinking deeply about the underlying social dynamics, not just memorizing phrases. He had a notebook he wrote in, his handwriting elaborate and old-fashioned, full of flourishes that belonged on historical documents. Why do people photograph their food? He asked during the 4th session, scrolling through Instagram on a phone he handled like it might bite him. Is this a new custom? In my day, one simply ate the meal. In your day? Zarah echoed, amused. How old are you? Something flickered across his face. Older than I look. It's good genetics. Must be amazing genetics. You don't look older than, 30? Thereabouts, he said, which wasn't really an answer. But the food photography, please explain. She tried. She explained social media performance, aesthetic culture, the Instagram food trend. Draven listened and looked baffled in a way she found oddly endearing. So they are not hungry, he said slowly. They simply wish others to see what they could be eating. Yeah, basically. Humans are very strange. You say that like you're not one. He smiled, that transformative expression that made him look less like a marble statue and more like a real person. A figure of speech. There were moments, small ones, that Zarah filed away in the back of her mind. The way Draven never ate or drank anything during their sessions, though he always offered her refreshments. The way she never saw him during daylight. He'd politely declined when she'd suggested meeting earlier in the day, claiming his schedule didn't permit it. The way the house was always candlelit, always warm, and she never saw any other people there, no servants or family members or anyone else. The way he sometimes used phrases that were decades or centuries out of fashion, then caught himself and corrected. The way he'd once said, "When I was in Paris in 1823, and then smoothly amended it to, in the 1920s, I meant to say, I sometimes transpose my numbers." Zarah had a graduate degree in linguistics and a functional understanding of context clues. She wasn't stupid, but the rational explanation was that her client was eccentric and rich and possibly had some kind of condition that made him seem odd, and the irrational explanation was insane, so she stuck with rationality and collected her $2,000 a week and tried not to think about it too hard. Besides, she was starting to enjoy the sessions for reasons that had nothing to do with money. Draven was fascinating. Beneath the formal exterior and the archaic speech patterns was someone genuinely kind, wickedly funny in a subtle way, deeply thoughtful. He told her stories that he claimed were family history, about Vienna during the Congress, about London during the Victorian era, about wandering through Rome when the Forum was still being excavated. His stories had the kind of detail that went beyond research, the little human moments that didn't make it into history books. And he listened to her in a way people rarely did, giving her his complete attention, asking follow-up questions about her research, her thesis, her thoughts on language evolution. He seemed genuinely delighted when she went on tangents about linguistic theory, his eyes brightening with interest. "You love this," he said during their 7th session, after she'd spent 15 minutes enthusiastically explaining code switching and vernacular variation. "Language, the way it changes and grows. It's not just academic for you." Zarah felt her cheeks warm. "Yeah, it's alive, you know? It's this constantly evolving thing that shapes how we think and connect. Every generation creates new ways to express ideas that the previous generation's words couldn't quite capture. It's beautiful." "It is," Draeven agreed, but he was looking at her, not the notebook in her lap, and something in his expression made her breath catch. She cleared her throat and looked away, suddenly flustered. "Anyway, should we talk about modern dating apps? That's probably something you need to understand." "I'm not certain I'll be using dating apps," Draeven said dryly. "No, but you need to know the culture around them. Here, look." She pulled up Tinder on her phone and started explaining swipe culture, and tried to ignore the fact that his proximity, leaning over to see her screen, made her hyper-aware of him in a way that was definitely unprofessional. During the 8th session, something shifted. Zarah had been explaining meme culture, showing him various formats and how they evolved and mutated across platforms, when she pulled up an older meme, something from early internet days that she'd included for historical context. "This one's ancient by internet standards," she said, laughing. "From like 2008 or something. You've probably seen—" "Ah, yes," Draeven said. "I remember when that was current. Everyone was constantly referencing it at social gatherings." Zarah went still. 2008 was 17 years ago. Draeven would have had to be attending social gatherings, presumably as an adult, which would make him at least 35, probably older. But he didn't look older than 30. He looked, if she was being honest, ageless in a way that had nothing to do with good skincare. She looked at him, really looked. The white hair that never seemed to grow or change, the pale skin that never flushed, never showed blemishes, never altered. The gray eyes that sometimes caught the candlelight and reflected it back like an animal's. The fact that she'd been coming here for 8 weeks and had never seen him in daylight. The fact that he never ate, never drank, never seemed to tire. The fact that he'd casually mentioned Paris in 1823 and Vienna during the Congress and Rome during excavations that had happened 150 years ago. "Draeven," she said slowly, "what are you?" The silence that followed was heavy. The fire crackled in the hearth. Somewhere in the house a clock was ticking. Draeven set down the phone very carefully and met her eyes. His expression was calm, composed, but she could see the calculation happening behind it. "You're a very clever woman," he said finally. "I wondered when you'd ask." "That's not an answer." "No, it isn't." He stood, moved to the fireplace, his movements as precise as ever. "What do you think I am, Zarah?" It was the first time he'd used her first name. It sounded different in his voice, intimate and strange. She thought about all the pieces, the impossible things she'd been ignoring. When she said it out loud, it sounded ridiculous, but all the rational explanations had stopped making sense weeks ago. "I think you're a vampire." Draeven turned to face her, and he wasn't smiling anymore. His expression was serious, ancient, the weight of something vast and old settling over him like a mantle. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." The world tilted slightly. Zarah gripped the arm of her chair, her mind racing through implications and impossibilities, and the sudden certainty that she should probably run. But she didn't. She sat there, looking at this man, this vampire who'd been unfailingly polite and kind for 8 weeks, who'd paid her generously and listened to her ramble about linguistic theory, and struggled earnestly to understand why people said, "Oof." "How old are you?" she asked. "I was born in 1347, Draeven said. "I've been what I am for just over 600 years. 600 years. Zarah's mind stuttered over the number. "And you want to learn modern slang because I rule half of Europe," he said, and his voice carried an edge of something now, power or authority or both. "And in 3 months' time, I must attend a summit where the old vampire courts will meet to negotiate our relationship with the modern human world. If I cannot navigate contemporary culture, cannot speak your language, cannot demonstrate that we can coexist with humanity as it exists now rather than as it existed when I was turned, then the conservative factions will revolt and will have a war that will destabilize everything. I need to prove that adaptation is possible, that we can learn, can integrate, can be part of this century instead of relics of the past. He said it all calmly, matter-of-factly, like he was explaining a business meeting rather than preventing a supernatural war. Zarah processed this. So I'm not tutoring some eccentric rich guy. I'm tutoring the vampire king of half of Europe so he can politically maneuver at a supernatural United Nations. Essentially, yes. And if you fail, there's a war. A war, fracturing of alliances, likely exposure to the human world in a catastrophic way, and several centuries of carefully maintained peace collapsing. But no pressure. Despite everything, Zarah laughed. It came out slightly hysterical. No pressure. Right. Cool. This is fine. This is a totally normal tutoring job. Draven moved toward her, and there was something different in how he carried himself now, less careful concealment and more of what he actually was, powerful, ancient, dangerous. But when he knelt in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level, his expression was gentle. You're afraid, he said. That's wise. I am dangerous, Zarah. I am a predator, and you are human, and every instinct you have is correctly telling you that I could hurt you. Are you going to? No. The word was firm, absolute. Never. You have my word, and I'm old enough that my word still means something. You may leave right now if you wish. I'll pay you for all the remaining sessions, and you need never see me again. Or, he paused, you may stay. Keep teaching me. Help me navigate this summit. Be part of something important. Zarah looked at him, this impossible creature kneeling before her with centuries in his eyes, and thought about all the ways this was insane. She should leave. She should run. She should call someone, though who exactly did you call about vampires? But she thought about the conversations they'd had, the way he listened, the dry humor and genuine interest, the way he'd been unfailingly respectful, always making sure she felt safe, always walking her through the house's wards and protections he'd set to keep her secure during her visits, the way he'd shared pieces of history like gifts, trusting her with truths he clearly kept hidden. And she thought about the fact that her whole life she'd studied language because it was how humans connected, how they built bridges between different worlds and experiences. What was this if not the ultimate translation challenge? I want to stay, she said, but I need you to be honest with me from now on. No more half-truths. Something bright and warm flashed across Draven's face. Relief, she thought, and something else. You have my word. Ask me anything. Do you drink blood? Yes. Animal blood primarily, though human blood is more sustaining. I have sources. No one is harmed. Sunlight? Fatal. I haven't seen a sunrise in over 600 years. Steaks? Crosses? Garlic? Stakes through the heart would kill me, but they'd kill anyone. Crosses are superstition. Garlic is simply unpleasant, but that's a personal preference. A slight smile. I also dislike cilantro. It tastes like soap. Despite herself, Zarah smiled back. Okay, then I guess we have a lot of work to do before this summit. Draven rose, offering her his hand. She took it, and his skin was cool, not cold exactly, but noticeably cooler than human. His grip was careful, controlled, conscious of his strength. Thank you, he said quietly. You cannot know what this means. I think I'm starting to. The lessons took on new dimension after that. Now that Zarah knew the truth, Draven stopped hiding, and she began to see the full scope of who and what he was. He told her about the courts, the intricate politics of vampire society, the conservative elders who wanted to remain hidden and isolated from the human world, treating it as a hunting ground and resource rather than a civilization to engage with. He told her about the progressives who argued for adaptation, for finding ways to coexist, for acknowledging that the world had changed and they needed to change with it or risk becoming irrelevant and eventually extinct. We cannot remain in the shadows forever, Draven said, pacing the sitting room while Zarah took notes. Humans have technology now that makes hiding increasingly difficult. Satellites, cameras, DNA analysis. It's only a matter of time before we're discovered, and when that happens, I'd prefer we're discovered as potential allies rather than monsters. But convincing the old ones of that is like trying to teach them to yeet, apparently. Zarah snorted. Did you just use yeet correctly in a sentence? I've been practicing. The summit, he explained, was meant to be a negotiation between the various European courts to establish a unified position on human contact. Draeven's territory, encompassing most of Central and Western Europe, was the largest single domain, which gave him significant influence, but also made him a target. If he appeared weak or out of touch, the conservative factions would use it as evidence that progressive vampires couldn't adapt, couldn't lead, couldn't be trusted with the future. So you need to show up and be fluent in the 21st century, Zarah said. Prove that old vampires can learn new tricks. Precisely. And I need to understand humans as they are now, not as they were when I was last among them freely. Your world has changed so much in just the last 50 years. The way you communicate, the values you hold, the technology you've woven into every aspect of life. I need to comprehend it deeply enough to argue for coexistence convincingly. No pressure, Zarah echoed his earlier words, but she was smiling. They worked intensely. Zarah started bringing her laptop, setting up presentations on modern culture, social movements, technological evolution. She taught him about social media's impact on society, about how information spread now, about memes as a form of cultural transmission. She explained hashtag activism and viral movements, showed him how humans organized and communicated in ways that would have been impossible even 20 years ago. Draeven absorbed it all with that fierce intelligence, but more than that, he engaged with it. He asked thoughtful questions about the ethics of surveillance capitalism, about echo chambers and polarization, about whether technology was bringing humans together or isolating them further. In my time, he said once, if you wanted to share ideas, you had to gather people in person or wait weeks for letters to travel. Now you can speak to thousands instantly, but you all seem lonelier than ever. Is that progress? I don't know, Zarah admitted. I think we're still figuring that out. An honest answer. I appreciate that. Their sessions stretched longer, 3 hours becoming 4, becoming entire evenings. Zarah found herself staying past midnight sometimes, talking with Draeven about everything from the philosophy of language to the best way to interpret a shrugging emoji. He told her stories from centuries past, and she told him about growing up in the digital age, trying to explain what it was like to have the entire breadth of human knowledge in your pocket, but still feel lost. She learned that Draeven had a sharp sense of humor hidden under all that formality, that he was passionate about art and music, that he'd known composers and painters whose works now hung in museums. She learned that he took his responsibility as king seriously, that the weight of ruling thousands of vampires across dozens of countries was something he carried with grace, but also with weariness. Do you ever get tired of it? She asked one night. The politics, the responsibility. Every day, he said simply. But someone must do it, and I have the power and the experience. If I abdicate, someone worse takes my place. So I endure. That sounds lonely. It is, he met her eyes. Or it was. The air between them felt charged suddenly, heavy with something unspoken. Zarah's heart rate picked up and she saw Draeven's eyes flicker, tracking the change. Right. Vampire, enhanced senses. He could probably hear her pulse, smell her adrenaline. Sorry, she said. I should probably head home. It's late. I'll call you a car. You don't have to, Zarah. His voice was firm. It's past midnight and you've been walking home alone through poorly lit streets for weeks. Now that you know what I am, you should also know what else might be out there. Please, let me ensure you get home safely. It should have sounded controlling, but instead it sounded concerned. Protective. Okay, she said. The car was there within minutes, and Draeven walked her to it, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The touch was brief, proper, but Zarah felt it like a brand. She was in serious trouble, she realized as the car pulled away, and she watched him standing in the doorway, pale and perfect and absolutely not human. She was developing feelings for a 600-year-old vampire king, and that was possibly the worst idea she'd ever had. But when she got home to her tiny apartment and checked her bank account and saw the deposit he'd made extra, beyond their agreed rate, because you're staying longer and providing more than we originally contracted for, she couldn't quite bring herself to regret it. The shift in their dynamic was subtle but undeniable. Draven had always been attentive, but now there was a quality to his attention that made Zarah's skin warm. The way he watched her when she talked, like she was the most fascinating thing in his very long life. The way he remembered everything she said, bringing up details from conversations weeks ago. The small gifts that started appearing, a first edition of a linguistics text she'd mentioned wanting, a scarf in her favorite color because the nights are getting colder and you insist on walking. He was courting her, she realized. In his old-fashioned, elaborate way, he was courting her. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel warm and valued and wanted in a way she'd never experienced. Every modern relationship she'd had involved confusing text messages and mixed signals and guys who couldn't commit to plans, let alone feelings. Draven's courtship was clear and intentional and overwhelming in its focused intensity. She called her best friend Maya one afternoon, desperate to talk to someone about the insanity her life had become. "So let me get this straight," Maya said over the phone, her voice crackling with disbelief. "Your mysterious tutoring client is a vampire, the vampire king of half of Europe, and he's flirting with you." "I think so. I mean, he gave me a first edition book that's probably worth thousands of dollars." "That's not flirting, that's courting. Old school courting. Zarah, this is insane." "I know. You should stop seeing him." "I know. Are you going to?" Zarah thought about Draven's smile, the way his whole face transformed when he was genuinely amused, the way he listened to her theories about language like she was revealing the secrets of the universe, the way he'd looked at her when he'd said, "It was lonely." "No," she admitted. Maya sighed. Okay, but if he tries to drink your blood, he won't. He's been very clear about boundaries." Famous last words, but fine. Just be careful and keep me updated. I can't believe your life is more exciting than mine, and I'm a corporate lawyer. Trust me, I can't believe it either. 2 weeks before the summit, Draven's lessons took on a new urgency. He needed to practice actual social interaction, not just theory, so Zarah started taking him out. They went to coffee shops, where Draven ordered drinks he didn't consume and tried to blend in with the laptop-tapping crowd. Zarah coached him on small talk, on the casual interaction styles of modern humans. "You're too formal," she said, watching him converse with the barista. "Relax, you're not negotiating a treaty, you're buying coffee." "I'm pretending to buy coffee," he corrected. "I cannot drink it." "Then pretend more casually." They went to a museum after hours, Draven using his considerable influence to arrange a private visit. He walked through galleries of art he'd watched being created, pointing out historical inaccuracies in the plaques, telling her stories about the artists. "Caravaggio was insufferable," he said, standing before a dark religious painting. "Brilliant, but absolutely insufferable. He started 3 duels in 1 week. I had to have him removed from Rome before he revealed us all." "Wait, was Caravaggio a vampire?" "No, just dramatic. Though he painted several of us. He had an eye for the inhuman." They went to a modern nightclub, the kind where the music was too loud and the lights strobed in disorienting patterns. Draven looked utterly out of place in his tailored suit among the crowd in clubwear, but he gamely tried to understand the appeal. "Why would anyone enjoy not being able to hear?" he shouted over the bass. "It's about the experience," Zarah shouted back. "The energy." "I've experienced centuries of energy. This is just noise." But he stayed, watching the crowd, studying how modern humans danced and flirted and interacted. Zarah caught him smiling once, not at the club but at her enjoyment of explaining yet another aspect of contemporary life. When they left, stepping out into the cool night air, her ears were ringing and she was laughing. "That was terrible," Draven said. "Yeah, kind of. Thank you for taking me. You're paying me very well to take you to nightclubs and museums." "I'm not paying you for this." He gestured between them, the space that had become something more than teacher and student. "This you're giving freely. That's worth more than money." Zarah looked up at him, this ancient king standing on a modern street corner, looking at her like she was precious. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Draven, I know, he said softly. I know this is complicated. I know I'm not what you should want, but I find myself wanting you anyway, and I'm too old to pretend otherwise. You're 600 years older than me. Yes, you're not human. No, this is a terrible idea. Likely. I want it anyway, Zarah whispered. Draeven's eyes went molten silver. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with careful tenderness. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and even through the coolness of his skin she felt the touch everywhere. May I kiss you? He asked, formal even now. Yes. He kissed her like she was made of something fragile and infinitely valuable, with a restrained passion that spoke of centuries of discipline and a desire he was carefully controlling. His mouth was cool, his touch gentle, and Zarah felt herself melting into it, her hands coming up to grip his jacket as the world narrowed to just this moment, this connection. When they pulled apart, she was breathless and he was looking at her with wonder. I have lived 600 years, he said quietly, and I have never felt this. What? Hope. Real hope. The possibility of something beyond duty and survival. You make me believe the future could be different. Better. Zarah's eyes stung. That's a lot of pressure to put on a linguistics grad student. You are far more than that. He kissed her forehead. Come, let me take you home. They drove through the city in comfortable silence, Draeven's hand clasping hers. When they reached her apartment, he walked her to the door. The summit is in 2 weeks, he said. After that, things will change regardless of the outcome. I want you to know that whatever happens, knowing you has been the greatest gift of this very long life. Don't talk like you're saying goodbye. I'm being realistic. There are factions that want me dead, that see adaptation as weakness. The summit could go wrong in a dozen ways. Then we make sure it doesn't. Zarah squeezed his hand. We've got 2 weeks. Let's use them. The final 2 weeks were intensive. Zarah moved into Draeven's townhouse, working around the clock to prepare him. They practiced conversations, ran through scenarios, rehearsed how he'd navigate modern social situations. She grilled him on current events, on pop culture references, on the subtle social cues that would mark him as contemporary rather than ancient. But they also existed in the spaces between preparation. They had late-night conversations about philosophy and language and the nature of change. They cooked together, or rather, Zarah cooked while Draeven watched and told her stories from history. They sat by the fire and read, comfortable in shared silence. Draeven told her about his turning, about the young man he'd been in the 14th century, about the plague that had killed his family and the vampire who'd offered him a choice, die or transform. He told her about the centuries since, about learning to navigate an existence that stretched beyond human comprehension, about watching the world change over and over again. Zarah told him about growing up in the internet age, about the strange isolation of being constantly connected, about finding purpose in studying how humans used language to bridge the gaps between their experiences. We're not so different, Draeven said one night. You study connection through language. I've spent centuries trying to build connections between disparate groups. We're both trying to translate between worlds. Except your mistranslations could start a war. True, the stakes are somewhat different. They laughed, and then Draeven was kissing her again, with more freedom now, less restraint. His hands tangled in her hair, and Zarah pressed closer, feeling the solid coolness of him, the carefully controlled strength. I want you, she breathed against his mouth. You have me, entirely. They made love in his rooms, in a bed that had existed for centuries, and Zarah discovered that vampires might be cool to the touch, but they burned with a passion that felt eternal. Draeven was careful with her, reverent, worshipping her with a devotion that made her feel cherished and desired and wholly seen. Afterward, lying tangled together, he traced patterns on her skin and murmured to her in languages long dead, words that sounded like prayers. What are you saying? She asked. That I love you. In every language I know. I want the universe to hear it in every tongue that's ever existed. Zarah's breath caught. I love you too, in this language, the only one I speak. But I love you. It's enough. It's everything. 3 days before the summit, other vampires began arriving in the city. Draven's townhouse became the center of a flurry of diplomatic activity. Zarah met creatures who looked like marble statues come to life, pale and beautiful and terrifying. They eyed her with curiosity and sometimes disdain, this human in the king's house. But Draven's hand stayed firm on her back, claiming her, protecting her. "This is Zarah Jamison." He introduced her to an elegant vampire woman who looked like she'd stepped from a Renaissance painting. "My partner and advisor on contemporary human culture." The woman, introduced as Katya, raised one perfect eyebrow. "A human advisor. How progressive." "How necessary," Draven corrected smoothly. "The world has changed. We change with it or we die." Katya studied Zarah with unsettling intensity. "Can she be trusted?" "With my life," Draven said, "and with our future." Over the next days, Zarah found herself in the strange position of advising immortal creatures on how to navigate the modern world. She explained social media to a vampire who'd watched the fall of Rome. She taught a 500-year-old countess how to use a smartphone. She refereed debates about whether vampires should have a social media presence, whether they should engage with contemporary art and culture, whether integration was possible or desirable. Some of the vampires were genuinely interested, eager to learn, excited about the possibility of existing openly in the world again. Others were hostile, viewing human culture as beneath them, seeing Zarah as an interloper or a pet. Draven navigated it all with diplomatic skill, but Zarah could see the strain, the weight of expectation, the pressure of keeping fractious groups together, the knowledge that failure meant war. The night before the summit, after the last of the visiting vampires had retired to their lodgings, Draven pulled Zarah into his study and just held her. "I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. "I haven't been truly afraid in centuries, but I'm afraid now. Not of dying, of failing, of letting everyone down." "You won't," Zarah said fiercely. "You've learned everything, adapted to everything. You understand this world now, not just intellectually, but genuinely. That's what they need to see, that it's possible. And if they don't listen, then we deal with it together. I'm not going anywhere." He pulled back to look at her. "After tomorrow, if this succeeds, my life becomes even more complicated, more dangerous, more public. I would understand if you wanted to walk away, return to your normal life. Normal is overrated. I'm a linguist who's dating the vampire king of Europe and advising on supernatural diplomacy. This is way more interesting than adjunct teaching." Despite everything, he smiled. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you have me anyway." The summit was held in a castle beneath the city, a vast underground complex that Zarah hadn't even known existed. Draven explained that most major cities had vampire infrastructure hidden below them, entire courts and meeting halls built in the darkness. The main chamber was breathtaking, all Gothic architecture and soaring ceilings, lit by thousands of candles that cast flickering shadows on stone walls. Vampires filled the space, hundreds of them, pale and beautiful and terrifying in their otherworldly grace. They represented courts from across Europe, from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, each with their own customs and politics and agendas. Zarah was the only human present, and she felt the weight of every immortal gaze that fell on her. But Draven kept her close, his presence a shield. The summit began with formal proceedings, ancient protocols that seemed designed to take hours. Zarah watched Draven navigate it with perfect grace, speaking in formal registers, honoring traditions, playing the part of the ancient king. But when the conversation turned to the question of human contact, of how vampires should position themselves in the modern world, everything changed. A vampire elder, ancient and hostile, rose to speak. He argued for complete isolation, for treating humans as resources rather than equals, for maintaining the old ways at any cost. "We are superior," he declared. "Why should we bend to accommodate lesser beings? Why should we learn their fleeting customs and temporary trends? We are eternal. We remain as we have always been." Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the crowd. Draven stood, and his presence commanded silence. "Remaining as we have always been is death," he said, and his voice carried authority honed over centuries. "The world changes whether we will it or not. Humans have built a civilization that spans the globe, connected by technology we can barely comprehend. They have weapons that could destroy us, surveillance that could expose us, scientific understanding that makes our nature explicable rather than supernatural. We cannot hide in the shadows forever and pretend we're still in the dark ages. He gestured to the assembled vampires. Look at us. We speak in protocols from centuries past. We cling to customs from when humans still feared the night, but humans have conquered the night. They've lit up the darkness, mapped the world, connected with each other in ways we never imagined. If we remain static while they evolve, we become obsolete, extinct. The hostile elder scoffed. So we should debase ourselves, learn their slang and their social media, become like them? We should understand them, Draeven countered, not to become lesser but to remain relevant. I have spent months studying contemporary human culture, and I have learned that they are not the simple creatures we remember. They are complex, creative, constantly adapting. They have wisdom we lack because they know they have limited time and must make it matter. He paused, and Zarah saw him draw himself up, saw the full weight of his kingship settle over him. I have learned their language, their customs, their ways, and it has not made me weaker. It has made me better able to lead, better able to navigate a world that will discover us eventually whether we want it or not, better able to ensure that when that discovery comes, we are positioned as allies rather than monsters. Draeven looked directly at the hostile elder. You ask why we should bend to accommodate them. I ask why we should remain rigid and break. Adaptation is strength, not weakness. Evolution is survival, and I will not lead my people into obsolescence because some of us are too proud to learn a new world. The chamber erupted in argument. Vampires shouted at each other in a dozen languages, centuries-old alliances fracturing and reforming in real time. Zarah watched it spiral, saw the summit teetering on the edge of collapse. And then Draeven did something unexpected. He pulled out a smartphone. The sight of the ancient vampire king holding modern technology silenced the chamber. Death. This, Draeven said, holding up the phone, is how humans communicate now, how they share information, organize movements, connect across impossible distances. If we want to coexist with them, we must understand not just what it is, but what it means, the philosophy behind it. He tapped the screen, pulled up his notes, the ones he'd taken during their lessons, Zarah realized with a jolt. Humans use language that is constantly evolving. They create new words, new meanings, new ways of expressing ideas. To them, language is alive. It grows. It changes. It adapts. He looked around the chamber. We pride ourselves on being immortal, on being unchanging. But language teaches us that the things that survive are the things that adapt. Latin is dead because it stopped evolving. English thrives because it absorbs, changes, grows. He spoke then about memes, about viral culture, about how humans transmitted ideas in the 21st century. He talked about social movements organized through hashtags, about communities built online, about the way technology had fundamentally altered human society in just the past 20 years. And he did it fluently, naturally, with the kind of deep understanding that came from genuine engagement rather than rote memorization. The vampires listened, some skeptical, some fascinated, all of them unable to look away. I am not suggesting we abandon who we are, Draeven said. Our history, our culture, our traditions have value. But we can honor our past while adapting to the present. We can remain ourselves while learning new ways to exist in the world. That is not weakness, that is wisdom. He let the words settle, then continued in a quieter voice. And I know this because I had the best teacher, a human who showed me that understanding another's language is the first step to understanding their world, who taught me that curiosity is not beneath us, that learning is not shameful, that adaptation is a form of strength. He looked directly at Zarah, and in front of hundreds of vampires he said, a human who showed me that the future can be better than the past if we're brave enough to build bridges instead of walls. The chamber was silent. Then Katya, the Renaissance vampire, stood. King Konstantin is right, she said. I too have studied the modern world. It is strange and chaotic and often bewildering. But it is also remarkable. Humans have achieved things we could not have imagined when most of us were turned. They've reached the moon, mapped the human genome, connected their entire species through invisible networks. We can dismiss them as lesser, or we can acknowledge that they have adapted in ways we have not, that they have something to teach us. Another vampire stood, then another. One by one, the progressive faction rose in support, but it wasn't enough. The conservative faction remained seated, hostile, unconvinced. The hostile elder stood again. "Pretty words," he said coldly, "but words are not policy. What exactly are you proposing, King Draeven? That we reveal ourselves? That we integrate with human society?" "Not yet," Draeven said, "but I propose we prepare for that eventuality, that we establish diplomatic channels, begin careful contact with human governments through secure means, that we modernize our courts, bring in human advisors, learn to navigate contemporary politics and technology, that we position ourselves so that when discovery comes, and it will come, we are ready to negotiate from a position of strength and understanding rather than fear and ignorance." "And you would have us trust humans?" The elder's voice dripped with contempt. "I would have us understand them well enough to make informed decisions rather than choices based on prejudices from centuries ago." The debate raged for hours. Zarah watched Draeven hold his ground, argue with eloquence and passion, demonstrate the very adaptability he was advocating for. He quoted contemporary philosophers and ancient ones, switched between formal address and modern idioms, showed that he could exist in both worlds. And slowly, gradually, the tide turned. Not all the way. There were still hardliners who would never be convinced, but the majority, the vampires who genuinely wanted to ensure their species' survival, began to see Draeven's point. Finally, as dawn approached and the summit needed to conclude, a vote was called. The motion was for cautious modernization, establishing a committee to study human culture, bringing in human advisors under carefully controlled circumstances, beginning discreet diplomatic outreach to select human governments, and mandatory education in contemporary society for all vampires in leadership positions. It wasn't full integration. It wasn't revelation, but it was movement, progress, the beginning of real change. The vote was close, but it passed. When the result was announced, Zarah felt relief crash over her like a wave. Draeven remained composed, thanking the assembly with formal grace, but she could see the tension bleed from his shoulders. They had done it. They had actually done it. As the summit concluded and vampires began to disperse, Katya approached them. "That was well done," she said to Draeven. Then, to Zarah. "And you? You taught him well. Perhaps you would consider teaching others? We'll need human cultural advisors for this committee." Zarah blinked. "You want me to tutor more vampires? We want you to help us build a bridge between our worlds, if you're willing." Zarah looked at Draeven, who was smiling at her with pride and love and hope. "I think I could do that," she said. The aftermath of the summit was chaotic in the best possible way. Draeven's townhouse became the headquarters for what was essentially a supernatural diplomatic revolution. Vampires came and went at all hours, all night hours, seeking advice, asking questions, trying to navigate the modern world they'd agreed to engage with. Zarah found herself at the center of it, teaching ancient creatures about everything from smartphones to social justice movements. She brought in other human experts too, carefully vetted friends and colleagues who could handle the truth, building a team of advisors who could help the vampire courts modernize. It was exhausting and exhilarating and absolutely surreal. But the best moments were the quiet ones, late at night when the last vampire had left and it was just her and Draeven, sitting by the fire that he kept burning because he knew she liked it. "I've been thinking," Draeven said one night about a month after the summit, "about the future." "That's vague and ominous," he smiled. "About our future. I want you with me, Zarah, not just as an advisor, though you're brilliant at that, as my partner in every way." Zarah's heart skipped. "Draeven, I know what I'm asking. I know it means stepping fully into this world, into danger and politics and a life that isn't remotely normal. I know I'm asking you to give up the human life you could have had." "I don't want a normal life," Zarah said. "I want this. I want you. I want to help build something that matters, that bridges worlds, and I want to do it with you." Draeven reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was old, the kind of craftsmanship that didn't exist anymore, a band of silver with a stone that caught the firelight. "This belonged to my mother," he said quietly. It's one of the few things I kept from my human life. I would like you to have it. Are you proposing? I am proposing a partnership, a joining of lives, a commitment to build the future together. Call it whatever term you prefer, but know that I am offering you everything I am and everything I have. Zarah took the ring with shaking hands. It was beautiful, heavy with history and meaning. She slipped it on, and it fit perfectly. Yes, she said. To all of it, yes. He kissed her then, and it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something impossible and wonderful. There's one other thing, Draven said when they broke apart. Something we should discuss, long term. Zarah knew what he was going to say before he said it. They'd danced around the topic for weeks. Turning, she said. Yes, I would never force it. The choice is entirely yours, and I will love you regardless of what you decide. But if you wanted to stay with me beyond a human lifetime, it's possible. Zarah had thought about it, of course, what it would mean to become like him, to live centuries, to give up sunlight and mortality and humanity itself. It was an impossible decision, terrifying and tempting in equal measure. I'm not ready yet, she said honestly. I need time to experience this world a little longer, to be sure. But ask me again, in a few years, when we've built this bridge, when I've had time to really understand what I'd be choosing. That's more than fair, Draven said. I've had 600 years. I can wait as long as you need. They settled into a rhythm, a life that was strange and beautiful and entirely theirs. Zarah continued her work as a cultural advisor, expanding her role to help other vampire courts navigate modernization. She became a bridge between worlds, translating not just language, but entire worldviews, helping immortal creatures understand the rapidly changing human civilization. Draven led his territory with the wisdom of centuries, but also with new perspective, making decisions that honored vampire tradition while adapting to contemporary reality. Together, they began the delicate work of preparing for eventual human contact, building frameworks for coexistence. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and conflicts and moments when the whole project seemed impossible. But they faced it together, human and vampire, linguist and king, partners in the truest sense. 3 years later, the first official contact was made between a vampire court and a human government. It was quiet, careful, just the beginning, but it was real. The negotiation took place in a secure location, human diplomats meeting vampire representatives for the first time in recorded history. Zarah was there, translating not just words but meaning, helping both sides understand each other. When the preliminary agreements were signed, establishing a framework for future cooperation, she looked across the room and met Draven's eyes. He was standing with the vampire delegation, regal and composed, but she could see the emotion there. Pride, hope, love. They had done it. They had actually done it. The celebration afterward was held in Draven's castle, not the townhouse, but the actual castle he owned in Central Europe, a sprawling Gothic fortress that had been his seat of power for centuries. It had been modernized in subtle ways, Wi-Fi and electricity and contemporary amenities woven into the ancient architecture. The party was a strange mix of vampires and humans, old world and new, champagne and blood wine, formal dress and business suits. It should have been awkward, but somehow it worked. People were talking, laughing, building connections. Zarah stood on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, watching the impossible scene when Draven joined her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, and she laughed because he'd learned that phrase during their second lesson, a lifetime ago. "Just thinking about how weird my life is, in the best way. Any regrets?" "Not even one." He pulled her close and they stood there together, looking out over a future they'd helped build. "I'm ready," Zarah said quietly. "Ready for what?" "To choose, to turn, to stay with you." Draven went still. "Are you certain?" "Zarah, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I want to. I've spent 3 years watching humans and vampires learn to coexist, building bridges, creating something new. And I want to be part of that future, all of it, not just the next 40 or 50 years, but centuries. I want to see how this story unfolds. With you." His hands came up to frame her face, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears that vampires supposedly couldn't cry. It's not reversible, he said. Once it's done, you can never go back, never see sunlight again, never age, never be fully human again. I know. I've researched it extensively. I've talked to other turned vampires. I understand what I'm giving up and what I'm gaining. The process is painful. I can handle pain. You'll be bound to the night forever. I'm already bound to you. The rest is just details. Draeven laughed, the sound wavering with emotion. You are the bravest person I've ever met. In 600 years, I've never encountered anyone like you. Is that a yes? It's a yes, whenever you're ready, however you want to do this. They planned it carefully. Zarah said goodbye to her human life, settling her affairs, making arrangements. She told Maya, who took it better than expected. So you're going to become an immortal vampire queen, Maya said over coffee. That's not something I ever expected to say. I'm going to be a vampire. The queen part is debatable. You're marrying a king. That makes you a queen. Oh my God, I'm going to be best friends with vampire royalty. You're taking this very calmly. Zarah, you're happy. Happier than I've ever seen you. You've found something that matters, someone who loves you like you're the center of his universe, and a purpose that uses every talent you have. Why would I object? Zarah hugged her friend tightly. I'm going to miss daylight coffee. We can still do night coffee. I'm flexible. The turning happened on a night when the moon was dark, in Draeven's private chambers with only those closest to them present. It was a ritual, ancient and sacred, treated with the gravity it deserved. Draeven explained every step, made sure Zarah understood exactly what would happen. The exchange of blood, the death of her human body, the 3 days of transformation where her cells would remake themselves into something new. Last chance, he said, his wrist already cut, blood welling dark and red. I will love you regardless. You can still change your mind. I'm not changing my mind. I love you. I choose this. I choose us. She drank, and the taste was copper and fire, and something else, something ancient and powerful. Then Draeven bit her neck, gentle even now, and she felt her blood flowing out as his flowed in, the exchange that would remake her. The pain came in waves, her body fighting and accepting the change simultaneously. Draeven held her through it, murmuring to her in dead languages, anchoring her as her humanity burned away and something new emerged. 3 days later, Zarah opened eyes that saw in the darkness, heard the whisper of the wind, felt the night like a living thing. She was vampire, and she was herself, still wholly herself, but more. Stronger, sharper, connected to the darkness in ways she'd never imagined. Draeven was there when she woke, watching over her with devotion. How do you feel? He asked. Zarah tested her new body, the enhanced senses, the strength, the strange absence of heartbeat. Powerful, different, still me. Always you, just evolved. She smiled and she could feel her fangs, strange and natural at once. Guess I need to update my LinkedIn. Linguistics, PhD, and vampire cultural advisor. He laughed and pulled her into his arms, and they stayed there as the night deepened around them, two immortals at the beginning of eternity. The years that followed were full and rich and strange. Zarah adapted to her new nature, learning the skills of vampirism while retaining her human perspective. She became invaluable to the integration effort, someone who could speak both languages, exist in both worlds. She and Draeven ruled together, not as king and consort, but as equal partners, making decisions that shaped vampire society. They traveled the world, visiting courts, building alliances, always working toward greater understanding between species. The night they finally announced their relationship publicly to the entire vampire community, there was some controversy. Some old vampires who thought a turned human couldn't truly be royalty. But Draeven shut that down with the authority of 6 centuries of rule and the absolute certainty that Zarah was his equal in every way that mattered. They married under the stars, a ceremony that blended vampire tradition and human custom, witnessed by beings from both worlds. Zarah wore moonlight and diamonds, and Draeven looked at her like she was his salvation. I love you, he said as they exchanged vows. In every language that has ever existed, in every tongue the universe has ever spoken, I love you. I love you too, Zarah replied, in the language we've created together, the one that bridges our worlds. I love you. They kissed as husband and wife, king and queen, vampire and vampire, partners in the eternal night. 10 years after the first summit, full disclosure happened. Vampires revealed themselves to the human world in a carefully coordinated announcement that Zarah had helped orchestrate. It was chaotic and terrifying and ultimately successful, the groundwork they had laid making it possible for humans to accept rather than attack. Zarah stood beside Draeven as he addressed a joint session of human and vampire representatives, explaining centuries of history, offering partnership rather than dominance. She watched him navigate the impossible with grace and wisdom, and her heart swelled with pride. This was what they'd built together, this impossible, beautiful bridge between worlds. Afterward, in the quiet of their chambers, Draeven pulled her close. "We did it," he said softly. "We actually changed the world. We're still changing it. This is just the beginning. And we have eternity to see how it unfolds." Zarah looked up at her husband, her partner, her king, and smiled. Eternity sounds perfect. They stood together as the night deepened, two beings who had found each other across impossible divides, who had built a future from courage and love and the belief that understanding was always possible if you were willing to learn the language. Outside, the world was changing. Humans and vampires were learning to coexist, to build something new together. There would be challenges ahead, conflicts and setbacks and moments of doubt. But Zarah and Draeven would face them together, as they always had, translating between worlds, building bridges, proving that love and understanding could transcend even the boundary between human and immortal. And they had forever to get it right. The story could have ended there, a perfect moment of peace and certainty. But life, even immortal life, was never quite that simple. 20 years after the disclosure, Zarah stood in a modern conference room that existed in the liminal space between the vampire world and human civilization. The room was carefully designed, windowless but brightly lit with artificial lights that mimicked daylight for the human participants while being tolerable for vampires. It was one of hundreds of such spaces that had been created in the decades since integration began, physical manifestations of the bridge between species. She was preparing for a presentation to a joint committee on linguistic drift in post-integration society, tracking how human and vampire language patterns were influencing each other. It was exactly the kind of work she'd dreamed of doing back in graduate school, though she never could have imagined the context. Her phone buzzed. She'd long since mastered technology that had seemed alien during those first lessons with Draeven, and she smiled at the message. "Running late, council meeting went long. Some things never change, even in the modern era. Love you. D." She texted back a series of emoji that would have baffled him 2 decades ago, but that he now used fluently, and settled in to review her notes. The door opened and Maya walked in, carrying coffee for herself and blood wine for Zarah. Her best friend was grayer now, laugh lines around her eyes, aging in the way humans did, while Zarah remained frozen at the age she'd been turned. "You ready for this?" Maya asked, settling into a chair. "I hear there are some conservative vampires planning to challenge your findings." "Let them. I've got 2 decades of data and Draeven backing me up. The king has your back. Must be nice. The king is my husband. It's literally his job." Maya grinned. "I still can't believe my best friend is vampire royalty, though I guess I've had 20 years to get used to it." They talked strategy until Draeven arrived, sweeping in with the presence that still made Zarah's breath catch even after decades together. He'd adapted to modern dress, trading historical finery for tailored contemporary suits, but he wore them with a regal bearing that marked him as exactly what he was. "Apologies for the delay," he said, kissing Zarah's forehead. "The council is debating the proposal for daylight technology research again." "Still?" Zarah shook her head. "It's been 5 years since the initial research showed promise. Old vampires move slowly, even when discussing how to move faster. It was an ongoing project, human scientists working with vampire researchers to develop technology that might allow vampires to tolerate daylight. It was controversial, some seeing it as unnecessary, while others viewed it as the next step in integration. Zarah and Draeven supported it, believing that giving vampires the choice to experience daylight again would be transformative. But the politics were complicated, as politics always were. The presentation went well. Zarah demonstrated how vampire formal speech patterns were bleeding into human diplomatic language, while human casual constructions were loosening vampire communication. She showed the emergence of hybrid slang, terms that existed only in integrated spaces, linguistic proof that the two species were genuinely creating something new together. There was pushback from conservative factions on both sides, humans who thought vampires should adapt completely to human norms, and vampires who saw any change as degradation. But the majority response was positive, recognition that language evolution was a sign of healthy integration rather than cultural erosion. Afterward, as they walked through the streets of a city that now openly housed both species, Draven took her hand. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "Your human life? Daylight? Mortality?" Zarah considered the question. She'd been asked it before, many times, but it never stopped being complicated. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I miss coffee that I could actually taste. I miss the sun. I miss the particular perspective that mortality gives you, the urgency. But I don't regret this. I chose it with open eyes, and I'd choose it again." Even knowing what you know now, the politics, the conflicts, the weight of eternity, especially knowing that. Because I also know the good parts, the work we've done, the bridges we've built, the fact that there are vampire human families now, children being raised in both cultures, the art and music and literature that's emerging from integration. And you, us, I wouldn't trade that for anything. Draven stopped walking, pulled her close despite the crowd around them, humans and vampires going about their evening. "I love you," he said. "That's never changed, never will change." "I know, I love you too." They continued walking, and Zarah thought about the long road they'd traveled. From that first night when she'd shown up to teach a mysterious client about Yeet, to this moment, walking openly as partners through an integrated world they'd helped create. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles, moments when integration seemed impossible, times when the gap between species felt too vast to bridge. There had been attacks from extremists on both sides, political battles that dragged on for years, painful compromises and difficult choices. But there had also been victories. The first vampire-human business partnership, the first mixed society cultural center, the first generation of children growing up knowing both species as simply part of the world's diversity. The slow, steady progress toward true coexistence. And through it all, she'd had Draven, her partner, her husband, her co-conspirator in building the impossible. He'd supported her work, championed her ideas, stood beside her as an equal, even when ancient protocols suggested otherwise. Together, they'd proven that a 600-year-old vampire king and a linguistics grad student could not only fall in love, but could change the world. They reached their current residence, a modern building that Draven had purchased and retrofitted to be the perfect blend of contemporary convenience and vampire security. It was home in a way the old townhouse had never quite been, a space they'd created together rather than one that belonged to his past. Inside, Draven pulled out his phone, something that still amused Zarah, seeing him navigate technology with the same ease he'd once struggled to achieve, and showed her a message. "The Daylight research team had a breakthrough," he said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "They think they've developed a treatment that might allow limited sun exposure within the next 5 years. Zarah felt her own excitement rise. "That's incredible. They want to know if we'd be willing to be part of the trial group. As public figures, our participation would help normalize it, show it's safe. Are you going to do it?" Draven looked at her, and his expression was full of wonder and longing and barely contained hope. "I haven't seen a sunrise in 679 years, he said quietly. "If there's even a chance I could see one again, stand in daylight with you, show you the world as I remember it from my human life, yes, I want to try. Then we'll try together." 5 years later, Zarah stood on a balcony in the early morning, watching the eastern horizon begin to brighten. Beside her, Draven wore a specialized suit that the research team had developed, technology woven into fabric, delivering the treatment that would theoretically protect him from the sun's lethal effects. It was still experimental. There were risks, but they'd decided together that some things were worth the risk. The first rays of sun broke over the horizon, and Draven didn't burn. He stood there, bathed in golden light for the first time in nearly 7 centuries, and tears streamed down his face. "I'd forgotten," he whispered. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is." Zarah, who had her own suit but didn't need it as desperately she'd only been vampire for 40 years, still remembered sunlight, clearly took his hand. "Thank you," Draven said, turning to her. "For everything. For teaching me to exist in this new world. For loving me. For choosing this life. For giving me a reason to want to see the sun again." "You gave me a reason to want eternity," Zarah replied. They stood together as the sun rose fully. 2 vampires experiencing something that should have been impossible, made possible by the integration they'd fought for, the bridges they'd built between species and worlds. It wasn't perfect. The treatment had limitations, only worked for a few hours, required regular administration. But it was real. It was hope. It was proof that the future could be different from the past. Behind them, the world continued its complicated dance of integration. There were still problems to solve, conflicts to mediate, bridges to build. But there was also progress, genuine change, the slow creation of a society where human and vampire could coexist. And at the center of it all, a linguistics grad student and a vampire king who'd found each other across impossible divides and built something beautiful. "So," Zarah said as the sun climbed higher, "what do you want to do with your first day in the sun in 600 years? Draven smiled, that transformative expression that had first made her fall in love with him decades ago. "Everything. I want to do everything. Show you the world in daylight. Visit places I haven't been able to see in centuries. Live." "Sounds perfect." They walked back inside, already planning their first daytime adventure, talking over each other with excitement. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and potential, full of work still to be done and wonders still to experience. Zarah thought back to that first night, showing up to a mysterious townhouse to teach someone about Yeet, having no idea that she was about to meet the vampire king who would change her life. If someone had told her then where she'd end up married to said vampire king, turned immortal, helping to integrate 2 species, standing in sunlight that should kill her, she would have thought they were insane. But life was stranger and more beautiful than any prediction could capture. "I love you," she said to Draven as they made plans, the words as true as the first time she'd said them. "I love you too," he replied, "in every language, every lifetime, every moment, forever." And forever, Zarah had learned, was exactly long enough.